Welcome back to you, Manny. We're discussing estate planning. My guest is Harry Joffe. If you'd like to email me, you can send your query to info@anchorcapital.ca. I left the program seriously. I come back smiling. Harry says he likes the program, with particularly the humour or the lack of humour. So, Harry, I'm sorry, but this is quite a serious program. We got an email for you, Harry, from Jack in Gordons Bay. He says, I'm a South African living abroad with a bar-coded ID. Can I use my annual allowance to receive offshore inheritance payments?
So that's a very tricky question. It looks simple, but it's very tricky. So we need more details from Jack. Has he tax immigrated or not? Is he still tax resident here? So if he's still tax resident here, then he still gets the 1 million SDA, and then he can take any money out through the 1 million SDA. If he's no longer tax resident here, then he doesn't get the 1 million SDA, and you have to apply for what we call an ART, or a tax clearance. But it gets even more tricky now. If the inheritance is recent, we're actually getting a note coming out of Sept soon to give us a set of rules how inheritances can leave the country. So if he is no longer tax resident and he's tax immigrated formally, the money might be allowed to flow anyway, depending on the circumstances. So I'd say we need a lot more detail on that. It's not a simple issue.
So are you indicating now, because don't you automatically become tax non-resident if you've been out for longer than 186 days or something?
No.
You have to actually apply officially to become
so to become non-tax resident formally, first of all, the facts have got to support that. In other words, you've got to be either out the country, as you say, there's a time test over 5 years, or there's a common law test where you've left the country never to return. And then you've got to formally deregister with SARS and give them notice that you want to become tax non-resident. And remember, there's a CGT exit tax that you'll have to pay, but then you become formal non-resident.
And Harry, are SARS reasonable in this, or is it laid down? Do they have to let you, do they make it more complicated? Do they make
No, I mean, I want that exit tax. That's the important thing. They want that CGT on all your South African assets except for property. But then after that, then you become non-resident.
Say except for property?
Property isn't subject to the exit tax, because remember, property is always subject to CGT.
On sale.
You sell it, whoever you are, resident or non-resident.
You get that 2 million, you get the 2 million
if you're living in
residential.
Now, the reason why they want that exit tax is once you become non-tax resident, they can't charge you CGT anymore, because it's only on residents. So they make you pay the exit tax when you tax immigrate. But property, they charge CGT to everyone.
Harry, so let's just talk about it, because the property market's been in the doldrums now for the last few years. I mean, people aren't selling homes, they're giving them away. So if you now rent your home out and you leave South Africa and you can only sell it in a year or two, would you still get that 2 million rand abatement from the purchase price to the sale price?
Remember, then it becomes
if you're making a profit.
Yeah, it becomes a complicated formula. So you would have to look at how many years you've owned the property, how many years you've lived in it as your primary residence, and then you get a ratio, and that ratio qualifies for the abatement, the balance doesn't. It gets quite complicated, the maths.
So if if you owned your home for 20 years and you'd been 18 years and 2 years rented out, you'd lose 10% of the 2 million.
Well, yeah, no. So 90% would then qualify for the 2 million. The other 10% would be fully taxable.
Okay.
According to the rates and the tables and that.
Joseph in Somerset, he says, how do I draw up a will if I'm unable to sign properly?
Again, now this is getting complicated as well. So I did my research before I came on the show, Bryan, because I saw these tricky questions today. So in the Wills Act, there's provision to sign by doing an X if you can't sign. So you can do an X, but then there's a lot of complicated formalities around the Commission of Oaths. So if you're not signing it, if you're putting an X or some kind of mark, a Commission of Oaths has got to witness, stamp that he's watched and he's seen that it's all correct, and he's got to sign every page of the will. And I would recommend to the clients to actually print out that section of the Wills Act, because again, it's got to be followed to the letter of the law. It's a lot of technical requirements, but they need a Commission of Oaths to certify.
Harry, has that always been the case, or was this recently changed?
No, always. The Wills Act.
Because some people do sign X because they can't sign any other way.
Yep.
Not able to write.
Or they're not able anymore. They could be injured or something like that.
Yeah, but look, if you're able and injured, and you're not compos mentis any longer, you can't change your will.
Correct. Then you need a curator.
Now that's a real problem for many people, because the cost of getting a curator is enormous, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to make a court application. You've got to bring the individual on who you're applying to evidence.
The individual can't bring the court application.
No, you would as a family. But I'm saying the individual would be asked to come to court and potentially give evidence. You'd have to bring a doctor's report. There's a whole process which you go through to get a curator applied. And then, of course, normally it would be an advocate who would be the curator, and they would charge a fee. So that is a complicated process. There are two other processes. You can, of course, get the assets into a trust first. So, if you as an individual know your mental capacity is starting to go, try and get all your assets into trust while you're still lucid. And then when you lose it, at least the trust can manage your assets for you, which is a lot simpler. And then there's something called an administration order from the master, which is generally for smaller estates that you can get a master's letter. But that's, again, much more for simple, smaller estates.
When you say simple, small estates? $1 million, $2 million?
Yeah, no, it's less than $1 million. I can't remember the figure in the Act, but it's in the Mental Health Act where the master can give you an order. So there's actually two costs I think we should be aware of, Bryan. There's the cost of a curator, and as you discussed earlier, there's a cost of a trust. So now we discussed the cost of an inter vivos trust. We didn't discuss the cost of a testamentary trust, because most people don't care about it because they, of course, will be gone and their estate will cover it. But the cost of a testamentary trust, to me, shouldn't be ignored. It's not so much the cost of setting up, it's the cost of running that trust. Because, you're going to have a professional running your testamentary trust as well, and they will charge a percentage of assets normally. So, it's not just thinking about setting up a trust in the will, because I know there's a question about what happens if you die without a will. So the will is not just important to set up the testamentary trust, but you need to consider, and this of course is your job in financial planners, how do we have enough funding to pay for that testamentary trust? Because every year the professional is going to manage the trust and charge fees. So here, Bryan, I'm going to unashamedly punt a Discovery product. And it's not just Discovery that offers this, but we do a nice product called our Estate Preserver, where the individual takes a policy, and it's not a full life policy, it's what we call an indemnity policy. And what it does, when the individual dies, it covers testamentary trustee fees for up to 10 years, and that period might be extended in our new product. But at the moment, it covers testamentary trustee fees for up to 10 years if our preferred provider is used. So the individual takes this policy, which typically will cost between 120 and 150 Rand a month, because it's not full life cover, it's just indemnity.
But it's still subject to medical, still subject to medicals.
Limited medicals, yes.
Limited.
Yes. And limited underwriting. And then you get your trustee fees covered, you get your conveyancing fees covered, which are also costs people forget in the estate. All properties that are transferred, you have to pay conveyancing fees. And it covers executors' fees as well if you use our preferred provider. So again, it's important to consider not just doing a will and setting up a trust in the will, but how you're going to fund and pay all those charges, having enough liquidity in the estate to cover that.
Harry, that doesn't sound high, 150 to 200 Rand.
No, it's not, because what we're doing is we are indemnifying the estate for the cost of these fees, and because it's our preferred provider, we've got obviously discounted rates, so we can cover those at quite a cheap amount. So you're not covering you, for example, for 5 or 10 million necessarily. We're covering the costs of an estate of 5 or 10 or 15 million. And we know what those fees are going to be, and so we indemnify those.
So will the fees be based on, you've got to provide that information, the size of the estate, and you can then do the calculation.
So when the client applies, they will insure themselves for costs of a 10 million Rand estate, say, and then they know their trustee fees for up to 10 million are covered, the executors' fees for up to 10 million are covered, and the conveyancing fees, of course, are flat rate. Those are covered as well.
Well, I must tell you, that's very interesting, and I think that's something people should be looking at. And there are a lot of financial planners who may not even know about it. Let me go to Vernon Hillcrest. He says, what will happen to my living annuity if the company I have it with goes under, and what protections do I have against losing my money?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Generally, the living annuity and all that kind of money doesn't belong to the insurer. It's on their balance sheet, but it's segregated assets. So those will be kept apart from the insurance company if they go in. Look, if an insurance company goes in, I mean, you, Bryan, you've been around longer than me. Normally they get bought out by another company because Saab is very, very cognizant of, all the financial stability of the system. So they won't normally be allowed just to go in and disappear. Normally, like when Fetcher was about to close, they were bought out. So you normally have someone buying them out firstly, but secondly, those living annuity assets are segregated, so you wouldn't.
But retirement, whilst you've got a retirement annuity and you haven't cashed it in, that is segregated.
Yeah, but
does that form part of the insurance company's assets?
As far as I know, it's on their balance sheet, but it doesn't belong to them like their property or their holdings are. So I'm pretty sure that would be protected.
So they just may be custodians?
Yes, that's the correct word.
Well, Louise in Witbank says, I'm currently setting up a trust. Please can you explain to me what the following terms mean? Founder, protector, trustee, and beneficiary.
Okay, so good question. So beneficiary is the obvious one. beneficiary or beneficiaries, who will be the beneficiaries of
And
the trust.
and the person setting up the trust can be a beneficiary as well.
Correct.
So it could be the husband, the wife, and the children down the
Exactly.
line.
So
Per stirpies, yeah.
The point is, if you're not a beneficiary, you can't benefit from that trust. I think it's more in the negative that you've got to know. An interesting point around beneficiaries, Bryan, and advice to our viewers, be quite clear how you name them. You know, we've had a few cases where we've said, where the trust leader said blood relatives. And then we had a case that went all the way up to the Constitutional Court where we had an adopted child. And they weren't sure if the adopted child could actually be a beneficiary because they weren't a blood relative. So you can be very specific.
And what was the ruling?
The Constitutional Court said they could be.
They could be.
But they lost all the way up. I mean, the lower court said they couldn't be because that's the technical reading. Whereas the Constitutional Court, of course, can extend our law. So be quite specific on the beneficiaries. Founder, of course, is also very simple. That's the person who sets up the trust.
Or settler. Could be a founder or the settler.
Settler, right.
That's
Puts the money into the trust to start.
Yeah.
Now, there, of course, there's also interesting issues. In the old days, before I was around, you would have a third party as the founder normally. You know, you would have a grandmother or a grandparent setting it up. And that makes no real sense. You can just have anyone now as the founder. You can have the client as the founder. Protector is not something that exists in our law. Protector is a construct of foreign law, where they have an individual, an independent party, who's there almost objectively to watch the trustees and give them advice. We don't have that concept in our law. It's never really done on a South African trust. That's for an offshore trust.
Okay.
And then the fourth category was, there were four people. There was founder, beneficiary, trust, protector, and trustee.
Yeah.
Trustee is, of course, just a people or individuals or corporates that actually manage the trust assets but don't benefit from the trust.
We haven't had a chance to talk about one thing, the changes of everyone having trust, the cousins and brothers and sisters being the trustees. We'll talk about that on the next program, how dangerous that is and what changes they've come about. The press has reported that since the first 10 days of September, two-pot system being implemented in September, it resulted in 161,607 tax directives received by SARS. Quite a lot of work that's got to be done. And also the comments made yesterday in the Sunday Times, the financial sector, is a lot of people are taking this money offshore. Well, I must say it simple. You've got to be mad if you take money out in the two-pot system if you're a high earner. If you're desperate and you need the money and you're not paying tax, yes. But there are admin fees and tax to pay. And if you owe any money previously, they will deduct it before you get your money. Please make sure that you know what you're doing. Harry, thank you for joining me this evening.
Right.
It's important to note that our program is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program, we'll certainly be dealing with healthcare. If you need to get hold of me, my details will appear on the screen. Thank you for watching and good night.